but I do walk around my community with a little more caution than I did before. When I'm up here at the shopping center, I find myself looking to the street a little more than I normally would, and I walk by the bus stop and I thought about it for the first time. So as I'm going about my normal life, I definitely have a lot more caution.
Welcome back, friends, to another episode of the Rigor Mortis podcast. My name is Adam, and again with me this week, we've got Jason.
How are you today, Adam?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. How are you?
I am great. These summer days are winding down fast, though.
Yeah, a little bit more comfortable in our recording studio as opposed to the last time we were in here.
Yeah, we might have about a month of comfort in here before it gets miserably cold.
Yeah, doom and gloom for several months.
Oh, too many months.
Too many months around here, yeah, that's for sure. So we've got a pretty interesting story today.
Yeah, today we're going to do the story of the Beltway snipers, also known as the D.C. area snipers.
Yes, I remember that when it was happening. This was back in 2002.
Yeah, I think I was in 7th or 8th grade at this time. I remember seeing this just about every morning on the evening news for a couple weeks.
Yeah, I would have been about the same age, and I definitely remember this. I guess it left an impression on me as a young child.
It almost gave you, took away a sense of your innocence because you suddenly didn't feel safe in common places.
I know. And this happened, I guess, a little ways from us, but it could have happened anywhere.
Yeah, probably about 8 to 10 hours from us. But
yeah,
definitely could happen anywhere. So, like you said, this started in October of 2002. Where did it take place?
It took place in the states of Maryland, Virginia, and the Washington, D.C. area over a span of about 3 weeks.
Right, okay. And so that was in October. I believe it started on October 2nd.
Yes, sir, that is correct. Actually, that night at 5:20 p.m., this was on a Wednesday, shots were fired through a window at a Michael's craft store in Aspen Hills.
Wow, 5:20 on a Wednesday. That's rush hour.
Yeah, you must have
been a lot of people around.
I would imagine, especially in that area.
Now, the shot went through the window. Was anybody injured?
Well, the bullet narrowly missed Ann Chapman, who was a cashier at the store at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. Since no one was injured, the shot was assumed to be random, and no serious alarms were raised. That wouldn't be the case around here.
That would not be. If a bullet went through a window around here, there would be paranoia until they figured out where it came from.
I know, but in a busy place like the Washington, D.C. area, Baltimore area,
I guess it's probably a little more common.
Maybe random shots being fired is just an everyday occurrence there, and we just don't know it.
That's scary.
But approximately 1 hour later, so this would put us at about 6:30 p.m., James Martin, who's a 55-year-old program analyst for NOAA. Now, who is NOAA? They do oceanic stuff, right?
Yeah, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
So this guy is definitely an established guy.
A scientist?
Scientist, maybe. Well, he was shot and killed at 2201 Randolph Road in the parking lot of a Shoppers Food Warehouse grocery store.
Okay, so at this point we have 2 different grocery stores in an hour with gunshots, with one person being killed already.
That's correct.
So things are happening quickly.
Very quickly.
And I believe it was on just the next morning, which was October 3rd, 4 people were actually shot within about 2 hours in that Aspen Hill area where the grocery stores were. And also later that night, there was another person who was killed in the Tacoma neighborhood of Washington, D.C.
They didn't stop there. Early on the next day, the next morning even, 7:41 a.m., James Buchanan, who was 39 at the time, was shot while mowing the grass in the Fitzgerald Auto Malls.
Wow, so broad daylight this time.
Yeah, very early. Probably a lot of people on the road.
Right.
A lot of commotion.
Rush
a lot of
hour.
people could have seen it.
Right. Well, this was just the start of their morning because at 8:12 a.m., a 54-year-old man named Kumar Wellikar was killed in Aspen Hill while pumping gas into his taxi at a mobile station.
I remember that when that happened live.
That happened live?
Well, not live, but I remember breaking news that there was another event. And I remember when this happened. It's crazy.
I think I remember that too because this was the first time where they really said, kind of keep your eyes open because people are getting shot in broad daylight doing everyday normal things. These don't seem like, gang shootings or grudge shootings or anything. This really seems random.
It's bizarre, yeah, One thing I didn't remember back then that I thought was interesting now was how active they were that day, because that same day, not long after, at 8:37 a.m., Sarah Ramos, who was 34 years old at the time, was at the Leisure World Shopping Center in Norbeck. She had just gotten off a bus, She was seated on a bench reading a book, and she had been shot.
Wow, so that's already 4 shootings early in the morning.
That's correct. And I believe there's one more, correct?
Yeah, I believe it was later that morning at 9:58. We had the last killing of the morning. It was 25-year-old Lori Ann Rivera. She was actually killed while she was vacuuming her Dodge Caravan at the Shell station in Kingston, Maryland.
Are we seeing some kind of a trend at all? I mean, there was a couple of people shot at gas stations.
And also shopping centers.
And shopping centers.
Seem to be the main targets.
So you almost could assume that that's what whoever's committing these crimes are targeting.
Right, and you're kind of wondering if there's some sort of a vengeance against maybe these kind of companies.
That would be weird, but you know what? You couldn't rule it out. Now, the shootings didn't end that day. There was a little pause in the chaos, but later on that night at 9:20 p.m., Pascal Charlotte was shot while walking on Georgia Avenue in Washington, D.C. He died less than an hour later, so that was another a fatal wound.
Right, so this is a few murders, a few shots, and they all seem to be related. I mean, in each one of these shootings, the victims were killed by a single bullet, which seemed to be fired from a distance, and basically they just disappeared after.
Now, how could they tell that these bullets were fired from a distance?
That's a good question. I'm not as familiar with that as you may be.
Is it that I'm just assuming this? Is it because there was no
eyewitnesses?
Maybe there was no chaos immediately at the scenes. I'm safe to assume these people were not completely alone. At least some of them had to have had other people around them.
These similarities weren't even registering to people at the beginning, but of course, as the news of this is getting out, fear quickly spreads throughout the community.
Oh yeah. The whole region, as far as media-wise, spreading the news throughout the newspapers, local channels and all that, and this was causing a mass chaos.
Right. So later that night, the chief of police, Chief Charles Moose, actually held a press conference and informed parents that schools were on a code blue alert, which meant that they had to stay indoors for the time being. No recess, probably very quick drop off and get in the building, and things like that. But they were saying at this time that the schools were a safe place for your children.
I bet there was a lot of parents that kept their kids home.
Yeah, I mean, I was in school on September 11th, and I remember a lot of people getting picked up that day. And I couldn't imagine something like this happening directly in your community.
This must have been terrifying for the students. This break in their everyday cycle, and for this kind of chaos, almost like the kind of thing that children that are living through war zones might experience.
Right, exactly. And did the police have any evidence at this time as to who might be doing this?
Well, they only had a few pieces of evidence to work with, including one initial report that during the Silver Spring attack, someone had reportedly seen a white box truck. So we'll keep that in our minds, right? After the murder in Washington, D.C., though, witnesses then began telling police that they had seen a blue Chevrolet Caprice.
That's a pretty different vehicle than a white box truck.
Yes, instead of the white box truck.
And this can be the problem with eyewitness testimony is people don't necessarily see the same evidence.
Right, it isn't necessarily that somebody's lying.
No.
It's just that
if you hear a gunshot and you're in a grocery store, you're going to look and turn your head, and the first vehicle that catches your eye is going to be the one that you think might be involved.
Correct. They also had initially believed that all the murders were carried out with the use of a .223 caliber. Now, this would be like an AR-15.
This long-range rifle?
Yes, yeah, you could definitely shoot at quite a distance with something like that, especially with some practice.
Right. Now, at this point, the shooters decided that this was kind of a small area. They wanted to expand. So on October 4th, Carolyn Sewell was wounded in the chest around 2:30 p.m. at a Michael's store. That was in Spotsylvania. She was basically just loading the groceries and stuff in her minivan and was shot. And at that point, journalists were almost on the 24-hour news cycle. I don't know if you remember that, but this was unfolding every morning on the news. Breaking news.
Every day.
Every day.
Now, at this time, they started to take a few days in between events, I guess you could say it, where the first day they had shot and murdered 4 people.
Right.
Then this happens on October 4th. there's a few days in between, and this takes us to October 7th.
I think I remember on the news them quite literally shutting down areas and just roadblocking and checking every vehicle and things like that. So, maybe they just got out of the area and kind of laid low for a few days.
Right. I mean, they had them guessing.
Right.
They had them thinking that something else was going to happen in the Washington, D.C. area.
Yeah.
They had to move.
Right. And then at this point, on October 7th, they actually kind of start toying with the police.
Yes, at 8:09 a.m., I believe, Iran Brown, a 13-year-old student, was shot in the chest and critically wounded as he arrived at the Benjamin Tasker Middle School.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is it was his aunt, actually, who had brought him to the school. She was actually a nurse, so she rushed him to the hospital emergency room, and despite some pretty serious injuries, he had damage to, some of his major organs. He actually survived and later went on to testify at the shooter's trial.
Wow. I'm sure that the quick reaction of his aunt is probably what saved his life.
It is, and like I said, this is the point in time where the killers start toying with the police.
Yes, the police find a tarot card, the death card. I don't know, I couldn't tell you what that looks like. Inscribed with the phrase, "Call me God." Well, that's kind of arrogant there. On the front, and on 3 separate lines on the back, "For you, Mr. Police, call me God."
Wow. And it also, I believe, said not to release this to the press.
Which, of course, they were going to.
Right, of course. I mean, yeah, I remember this when they said not to release it to the press. And the police did their best effort to not release to the press. But then the Washington Post actually found out about it the next day and published about the tarot card.
And that was against the police wishes.
Yeah, and it was just the next day on October 9th. Late at night, I believe it was like 8:18 p.m.
Sure.
53-year-old Dan Harold Mayers was shot while pumping gasoline at a Sunoco gas station. And that was near the city of Manassas.
Yes, very historic area.
So this is kind of being spread out through a wider area, but as the title says, around the Beltway.
Right, a wider area, and like I said earlier, a wider time frame too, because the next attack was on October 11th at 9:30 a.m. when 53-year-old Kenneth Bridge was shot dead while pumping fuel, another gas station patron, this time at an Exxon station off Interstate 95 in Spotsylvania County. This was in the near the Fredericksburg area.
Right, and I remember during this time seeing on the news, like, gas stations were literally putting drapes down, so with the hopes that somebody wouldn't see you pumping gas, because people were afraid to get out of their vehicles at gas stations and shopping centers. And understandably so.
I couldn't imagine.
Right, and then a couple days later, again, another lapse in between. 3 days later, on October 14th at 9:15 p.m., 47-year-old Linda Franklin, she actually worked for the FBI. She was shot dead in a covered parking lot at the Home Depot. So again, another shopping center between 8 and 10 at night.
Wow. What seemed to be a very good lead after the October 14th shooting, though. But it was later determined that the witness was inside the Home Depot at the time and was lying.
Right, I believe he said that he saw something, and then they determined, obviously, that you couldn't have seen what you saw if you were inside the building.
He was actually convicted of interfering with an investigation. I hate it when people just get involved in this stuff.
Right, saying nothing if you don't know is better than lying.
Yeah, why do people lie? To get their friggin' little 15 seconds of fame?
It's true, yeah.
Bullshit. On October 19th at 8 p.m., 37-year-old Jeffrey Hooper was shot in a parking lot near the Ponderosa Steakhouse on State Route 54 in Ashland, Virginia.
Right, and this, I believe, was about 100 miles, I think, from Washington, D.C. So, how long would it take us to travel 100 miles?
Wouldn't take us that long, Jason.
Hour and a half, maybe 2 hours?
Yeah, especially if you're on a mission.
Right, exactly.
Now, at this time, the authorities discover a 4-page letter from the shooter in the woods that demanded $10 million and made a threat to children.
I remember this. I believe they threatened to shoot a school bus.
Yeah, and you know what? They'll do it because they already shot one child.
Absolutely. Yeah, and as terrible as this is, it's not even the end. I mean, on October 21st, the Richmond area police arrested 2 men with a white van outside of a gas station. They actually turned out to have nothing to do with this case, but of course, as luck would have it, they were illegal immigrants.
You gotta go. But they had no connection.
No connection at all. So the next day, on October 22nd, they actually shoot 35-year-old Conrad Jackson, who's actually a bus driver. So he's kind of leaning towards the threat that they made to children, maybe showing that they're not joking around.
Yeah, I mean, this was at 5:56 a.m.
Probably just starting his morning route.
Yeah, well, he was standing on the steps of his bus. So
Right.
he was probably, doing his early morning checks and all that stuff that they do.
Right, and in that previous letter, at this time, Chief Moose releases part of the letter that says, "Your children are not safe anywhere at any time." Now, you're a parent. I'm a parent. I mean, my kid's not leaving the house if that's the case.
I was gonna say,
I'm terrified.
A lot of parents kept their kids home. Had to have.
Had to have. And, to shut down a large metropolitan area like this, I mean, they were really on a tear.
Yeah. Well, no shootings occurred on October 23rd. This day still holds some significance because there was 2 events. First, ballistic experts confirm Johnson as the 10th fatality in the Beltway shooting. Second, in a yard in Tacoma, Washington, police searched with metal detectors for bullets, shell casings, or other evidence that might provide a link to the shooters. A tree stump believed to have been used for target practice was seized. So they think they know where these guys were practicing.
In Tacoma, Washington? That's all the way across the country.
What brought them to that?
We'll get there.
Okay. So what happens next?
The crime spree actually comes to a close at 3:15 a.m. on October 24th.
This is when John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Melvo were found sleeping in their car, a blue 1990 Chevy Caprice, so somebody did see that, at a rest stop off Interstate 70 near Mayersville, Maryland.
Okay. And they were actually, I believe, arrested on federal weapons charge. They found, a rifle in the car, and they actually found a little hole near the license plate where the guy was putting the seats down and literally shooting out of the trunk. So that's why there was no witnesses to this.
So what you're saying, for those that might not have picked that up, is that it's assumed that somebody, at this time they're assuming that somebody was inside the trunk looking through a little peephole and shooting through that?
Right near the license plate.
Wow. So that would explain why they were able to... I'd imagine it's very hard to fire off a shot in there. It must be very loud, deafening.
Loud, definitely, yeah, but it muffles it to the outside, I would believe.
What does that do to one's hearing? I mean, I know, not to go off topic here, but wouldn't that make you permanently deaf?
Yeah, I would think it would be something like a concussion grenade almost.
I'd imagine. Now, police were tipped off by Whitney Donahue, who was a passerby that just noticed a vehicle that stood out to her.
Right, they were on, like they said, it was on an off-ramp, and she just happened to be driving by and noticed the Chevy Caprice, which had been in the news a little bit as one of the potential vehicles.
Yeah, and this vehicle, I'd imagine, would stand out, being as old as it was. This is 2002.
Yeah, it looked like junk.
And this is a 1990s vehicle.
Right.
1990.
Right. And after she tipped off the police, Trooper Wayne Smith of the Maryland State Police was actually the first to arrive at the scene, and he immediately used his unmarked police vehicle to block off the exit by positioning his car sideways, and he also got 2 tractor-trailer truck drivers to park their sideways as well to completely box in this rest area.
Brave guys, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen, but they knew they had to do something quickly.
Right.
Now, more troopers arrived at the scene. The rest area was effectively sealed off, like you said, at both entrances. Later, actually, as truck driver Ron Lance was attempting to exit the rest area, his tractor-trailer was commandeered by troopers who used the truck in place of their car.
Well, obviously, a trailer truck's going to be much harder to get through than a police car.
I was going to say, yeah. To complete the roadblock at the exit. So this was multiple vehicles.
Right. And they sealed off this park and ride, basically. They sealed it completely off with these trailer trucks, and then they had the SWAT officers moved in to arrest the guys, which they were found sleeping in the vehicle, but they did find a weapon. Yes,
a stolen Bushmaster 223, which would be an AR-15.
Right, and they also found a bipod, I believe, which helped him with aiming.
I'd imagine. It's crazy that they even pulled this off. Ballistics tests later conclusively linked the seized rifle to 11 of 14 shootings, including one in which no one was hurt. So they retrieved probably a bullet that might not have been as damaged off of that.
Right, right. And it sounds like they may have used another weapon for the other three shootings, or maybe, the bullets were too damaged to test, or maybe something like that.
That's what I'm almost wondering, if they were too damaged to test.
Yeah. Yeah, and the police were able to track these suspects down from a telephone call, which was traced to a payphone at a gas station in Virginia. They actually, after they monitored this phone call, the police missed the suspects, but just a matter of a few minutes, and they actually detained occupants of a van at another payphone, thinking it might have been them.
Now, on the phone, the sniper was boasting of his cleverness. Also mentioned a previous unsolved murder in Montgomery. This would be Alabama.
Montgomery, Alabama.
Yes. This was identified as a September 21st shooting at a liquor store. On October 17th, authorities said they matched Malvo's fingerprints found at the Benjamin Tasker Middle School site with one lifted from a liquor store scene. Two different states, but they were able to put it together.
Right, and they started in the D.C. area on October 2nd, but apparently they started shootings in Alabama on 2 weeks earlier, almost on September 21st, and people didn't even connect those at the time.
Wow. Well, I mean, how would you?
I mean, good point. I mean, it's hundreds of miles away.
In fact, you almost wonder if the shooter hadn't have been bragging about that on that phone call, would that case have gone unsolved?
It's very possible.
Now, Jason, how did they do this? How did they carry all this out?
Well, they used the stolen Bushmaster that they had. They actually had a holographic weapon sight, which is very effective for aiming. They also had that Chevy Caprice we were talking about with the hole in the back, so they basically made it like a rolling sniper's nest.
Wow. The back seat was modified to allow person access to the trunk. So it must be that the section was taken out.
Yeah, I think these are, this was an old car. Now very common for our vehicles to just have pull-down back seats. But essentially, I would imagine that vehicle is so old it didn't have that, and they just did that themselves.
Yeah, what I'm seeing a guy kind of laying in the prone position with his bipod set up. He's got his rifle on that, and his legs are kind of hanging out into the vehicle itself.
Right,
while
right.
his, maybe his torso and up are in the trunk.
Right. And I there was actually a great movie from whatever Spike TV used to be. I don't remember what it was, but they had a great movie on this, and that's basically how they depicted it.
Yeah, that's the only way I could see this possible, but still, crazy. It's just nuts. I mean, the whole thing, nobody caught on to any of this before any of it happened.
And does anybody know why they did this?
I don't know. Well, we can go a little bit into the motive right now. What do you got on that?
Well, I think that the prosecution said that John Allen Muhammad intended to kill his second wife, Mildred, who he had felt kind of estranged him from his children. Basically, their theory was that the other shootings were intended to cover up that main shooting that happened in Alabama. So, maybe they just thought the Alabama shootings were gang-related or something like that.
That's a weird motive. I mean, I'm not seeing how that makes any sense.
No, especially whereas, they were so far away. If he did all these shootings in Alabama, then she could maybe look like a random target, but having spread them out, it doesn't make sense.
No, I mean, you would have thought that if they were going to make this look like a random thing, they would have just kept their operation in the Alabama area.
Right, exactly. But he did actually frequent the neighborhood that she lived during these attacks, and some of the incidents actually occurred nearby.
Additionally, he had earlier made threats against her. Mildred herself made the claim that she was his intended target. So she probably was warning other people, hey, if something happens to me, this is who did it. Probably has even told the authorities that as well. However, Judge Leroy Millett Jr. prevented prosecutors from presenting that theory during the trial, saying that a link had not been firmly established. And I got to agree with the judge on that one. I just don't really see.
I do too. And unfortunately for Muhammad, at the trial in 2006, Lee Boyd Melville actually testified that the aim of the killing spree was to kidnap children for the purpose of extorting money from the government and to set up a camp to train children how to terrorize places. So like a little children's terrorist camp that you see on the news in the Middle East.
I'm sorry, but that makes no sense to me either. You're going to kill a number of people, but all you really want to do is kidnap children for ransom, essentially.
Right.
And then also set up like an Al-Qaeda type training camp sort of thing here. Why wouldn't you just do that the way that these other terrorist groups do that?
Right. I mean, killing random people in gas stations and grocery stores doesn't make any sense for that motive.
I'm just not seeing the connection myself.
Me either. But during the trials, two of the victims in Virginia, during the trial of two of the victims that were killed in Virginia, John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo were both found guilty of murder and the weapons charges. And the jury actually recommended in John Allen Muhammad's case that he gets the death penalty. And they also recommended for Malvo to get life in prison. I believe that was because he was a minor.
I'm going to say probably because of his age.
Right.
I mean, the judges concurred in both cases. So this was established for them in the state of Virginia.
Right. And also in Alabama, law enforcement alleged that the snipers engaged in a series of previously unconnected attacks that we had talked about. And they actually had charges pending there, Maryland, and other places in Virginia.
Wow. So these guys have had, this was just the early part of their court time. They also had to be tried in multiple locations.
Right, as well, and I believe they were tried federally as well.
Now, after the initial convictions and sentencing, Will Jarvis, who was the assistant Prince William County prosecutor, stated he would wait to decide whether to try Malvo on capital charges in his jurisdiction until the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on whether juveniles may be subject to the penalty of execution. That's kind of interesting.
Right, because as a minor, even if it was as a minor, even if as a minor he was convicted in a capital case, he's still eligible for the death penalty. But luckily for him, he actually reached a plea agreement in the time that was being considered. So he pleaded guilty in the case that happened in Spotsylvania County, and he pleaded guilty to murder to avoid a possible death sentence, and also agreed to additional sentencing of life. So he probably got like 10 life sentences.
Wow. Sounds like a great plea there.
Yeah, I mean, he was going away forever one way or the other.
There was a lot of people, I remember, when this was happening, they wanted them both to get the death penalty.
They both deserved it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, they ended so many lives and affected so many hundreds other that even now, over 15 years later, we're talking about it.
Yep.
You know? But this brings us to a day, the execution of John Allen Muhammad.
Yeah, in the days leading up to his execution, John Allen spent time with his lawyer working out a final appeal to the Supreme Court, and he also gave him the rights to permission to write a book about him.
Interesting. When did that come out? Has it come out?
I'm not sure if it's come out.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I wouldn't mind checking that out, though. I bet that would be a good read. Unfortunately, a sad read, but definitely an interesting book if you're into the true crime thing. Now, one of his last words to his lawyer was, "I love you, brother."
No, sincere.
That's very sincere. Probably the most sincere thing that this guy's ever done or said in his life.
Right, and then after he said that, he was executed by lethal injection on November 10th of 2009. The procedure began around 9 o'clock at night, and he was dead within 5 minutes.
Now, his execution was viewed by 27 other people, including victims and family members.
That must be intense to go to an execution. I couldn't imagine.
But to some, I'm sure that's what gave them closure to this. So I'm sure everybody, it's a traumatic thing, but this is what kind of ended this, as far as the concern of John Allen Muhammad goes.
Right, and Lee Boyd Malvo is still serving multiple life sentences in a state prison in Virginia, Supermax, of course, and he'll be there for the rest of his life.
Wow. So I got a little bit on this, right? Kind of going back to what we were saying about the trial and all that and the motive. To me, I don't think it was that. I just feel like you had one guy, you had an older man, and you had a younger child, right? Or a young man, we'll say, right? We'll call him a child, young man. and he's very easily influenced.
Of course.
From what I understand, he didn't have a father.
Right.
He grew up without a father, and so the elder of the murderers, John Allen, kind of took him under his wing. And I think John Allen had a plan all along. You know, he was kind of grooming him. He trained him. Allen had experience with these types of weapons. And I think that whatever Allen wanted to do, that's what they were going to do.
I agree.
And I think that they just went on a shooting and killing spree just for the sake of going on a shooting and killing spree. Some people have said that there's some kind of extreme Islam involved in this. I don't see that.
I don't think so.
I don't see that at all. I mean, but back in those days, people were real quick to say it has to be the Islam.
Right.
I really don't see that.
I agree. I think this was a random vendetta from a crazy guy.
Yeah, who just happened to be a Muslim and has nothing to do with it. But definitely crazy story.
I remember this like it was yesterday, and it was 1 year after 9/11, and you're really starting to see the 24-hour news cycle coming about, and this is one of the stories that you first got to see unfold on TV.
Yeah, it was almost live. Almost live. Whenever something would happen, and it got to a point, a few days in, it almost seemed like there was camera crews everywhere, just waiting for something to happen, like sharks waiting for, some chum to hit the water.
And I know we said it in our last case with Delphi as well, but another good example of the community and the police working together and getting the job done.
Yeah, and across multiple states, multiple levels of law enforcement.
Yep.
They were real quick to get those fingerprints off the bottle in the liquor store and match them to the fingerprint at the middle school.
Right.
That was very quick.
Very quick.
So yeah, I mean, it seems like we're always tipping our caps to law enforcement here. I guess we're picking the stories where they're doing it right, because the media is always saying that they're doing it wrong. But
I'm sure we'll get a few where it goes in the other way.
Oh, I'm sure. I definitely found this to be an interesting story. I'm definitely going to look into seeing if I can get my hands on that book and checking that out before summer comes to an end here and we're locked up for the winter doing other things.
Absolutely. And if we do find that book, we'll post a link to it on our social media as well.
Absolutely. Well, guys, thank you for listening to another episode of the Rigor Mortis podcast.
Thank you, and we'll hopefully see you again next week.
Yes. Take care. Bye-bye. Hey guys, we're not hard to find. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at the Rigor Mortis Podcast.
Yep, and also our email, therigormortispodcast@gmail.com.
I love the emails, guys. While I'm on my lunch break at work, this is something I look forward to reading. So please keep me entertained and keep our inbox full.
Yes, absolutely. Let us know if you love the show. Let us know what we can improve on. And, if you have any other suggestions for us, we'd love to hear those as well.
Yeah, we definitely love listener suggestions. Keep them coming in. We've gotten great feedback so far.
Absolutely. And we have our most important, probably, social media would be the Rigor Mortis Podcast Patreon page.
Yes, please take a look at our Patreon page. We're an independent podcast. We don't have a whole lot of money to do this. We're kind of doing it as a passion and a hobby that we want to pursue.
Absolutely. And every minute we're out here working on this is one more minute that our wives are getting upset with us. So.
Yeah, so please help us justify that to our wives, as well as help us to grow the show. This show is brought to you by people like you.
Absolutely, and all your donations just help us to make the show better and do more editing and be able to put more back into you.
And like we were saying, if we can justify this to our wives, then we can certainly justify putting out a couple more episodes a week.
Absolutely, and thank you guys always for listening.
Yes, goodbye.